Thank you for coming in here and for your presentations. And I suppose some of the information is quite concerning, and I think especially what Nem had in her opening statement. And I didn't get the opportunity to read your opening statement, Nem, before you delivered it, but I certainly will be going back and going over the details because you have a lot of information in there. I suppose we have to recognise that things are improving, albeit at a very slow rate. And we're coming from a very low base. And I suppose, as I mentioned to Blessing, and I think all of you have mentioned that there's no public pathway to adult assessment for autism, and that is proven to be a huge problem. There's a pilot programme, some of you indicated there, so I'm just wondering if you know where that's at, just even to indicate. I am a little bit concerned when I hear pilot programme, because Ireland's famous for launching its pilot programmes that remain pilot for years and years and years and never progress on, and we never evaluate and assess and use to actually put the services in place. And because there's no public pathway, I suppose most people have to go private. And I'm just wondering, what is the cost of that? And as Nem pointed out, and we know anyway, 85% of autistic adults are either unemployed or underemployed. So pain has to be an issue. And then when you are identified, because I mean, I meet people all the time who say to me that they've only been identified as autistic maybe in the last year or two. And the reason being is that another person they were having a conversation with that possibly was autistic themselves said something to them, oh, as you're autistic, you know, and they'll say, but I'm not autistic. And then they'll get them thinking and they'll go and they'll be assessed. And it's like it's a relief to them then because they suddenly understand why maybe they felt differently about things or why they acted in a certain way. But again, other than, like, you obviously all in your organisations, respective organisations, give support of different types to people, autistic people. But again, it's like I asked Blessing, is there supports for people there, again, who cannot afford to pay for them? Is there any alternative other than from, and I recognise the importance of peer support, and that's been offered through your respective organisations, but even professional support, do you have to pay for it? Is that the only way you can access it? And I suppose, is there a nationwide reach for each of your organisations also so that everybody in every part of this country can access support if they need it? Or how easy is it to find the supports they need in the community?
Yeah, well, in terms of the cost, it can vary massively. So the Adult Autism Practice is a private organisation, but our costs are actually, it's not low, it's €850 for the full assessment with the official diagnosis, which people need to access services. This is the issue. Whereas a lot of people within the autistic community, and we would also support self-identification, and we would support people with that with an initial consultation. But for an official diagnosis, which is needed often to access services and workplace accommodations, with us it's 850, but that's very low compared to other services. It would typically be up to 2,000, 2,500, even more. And there is literally no other pathway within Ireland to access that. Sometimes if people are already within mental health services, they might be, lucky in inverted commas enough to meet a professional who will support them with an assessment, but more oftentimes than not, they're actually told, no, we don't do autism assessments. So, even if somebody is coming and saying, here, I really think I'm autistic, here's the reasons why I think that, they go, okay, well, but we don't do that. And are sometimes, and they'll refer to private services then, out of public services. And we're talking about people who would be very well known, might have been seeing a therapist, psychiatrist, psychologist for many, many months, but told, no, you have to go private for the assessment, which is completely unnecessary.
Thriving Autistic, we're all, as I said earlier, neurodivergent, and we're all professionals. So we're psychologists and occupational therapists, etc. We do have some psychology clinics actually pioneered by the Adult Autism Practice. What they do is they fund a one-to-one session with an autistic psychologist or occupational therapist, one of our people. So they provide us with some funding from everyone that they diagnose, and then we support that person, give them one session free of charge. Okay. And that funds our professional to do the session. We also offer, then again, it's just donation based. So we have groups that we run for people who've just been identified whether it's been professionally or that they've realised within themselves. So we provide support groups as well, 6-week support groups and monthly support groups that are facilitated by psychologists or occupational therapists or professionals. But we don't have government funding for that, so we're limited, obviously, in our capacity. But on, I suppose, the plus side, we are entirely remote. So because we're an online-based service, anyone can access it if they have access to an internet connection and a device.
You said that government funding. So do you get government funding at all towards anything?
Not yet.
No.
We're new. I suppose
Yeah.
this is our 3rd year. We've hit the ground running, providing services, and so we haven't applied for core funding yet. That's on our roadmap for this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
But publicly, there is no app
Publicly,
which
there's
supports-
nothing.
There's nothing.
I mean,
Nothing.
we have HSE teams and private clinics referring people to us on a daily basis.
true.
I was just going through our figures there. Last year, we had 8,000 email support requests.
Yes, just kind of chime in on some of that, and just to answer from our perspective. Yes, there are no public services for adults. As we've discussed, no diagnostic services, but no, if you are diagnosed, nothing after that. There are kind of cross-disability things that a formal diagnosis can help you access, but no guarantees, as in accommodations in the workplace, or accommodations in 3rd level education, or possibly applying for disability allowance or something like that. But there's no kind of autistic supports. They're beyond residential and disempowering, institutional care and institutional residential, but nothing to support autistic people in their communities and to live their best lives. We are a national organisation as Neurobright Ireland, but we are entirely unfunded and run by disabled volunteers. We are all multiply neurodivergent ourselves, and the majority of us are also disabled in other ways. So we are, while we have built a large community, it is kind of the community is providing support to the community. We host community spaces across a number of social media platforms where members can speak on an ongoing basis and kind of form sub-communities or groups for neurodivergent professionals, for neurodivergence and 3rd level education, LGBTQ plus neurodivergent people. But those are literally the autistic and otherwise neurodivergent people supporting each other because there is nobody else to do so. Thriving Autistics post-diagnostic supports and counselling and their peer groups are a massive boon to the community. And we really cannot emphasise enough how potentially life-saving they are. Because our community members would also talk to us and talk to each other about the things that helped them, and that is one thing that has come up a lot. I will say from what I am aware of, the adult autism practices prices are on the lower end of possibly the lowest I've heard of when it comes to private diagnosis for adults. So 850 is kind of a minimum per assessment. So one thing I did want to highlight is that, as we've mentioned before, most autistic people are neurodivergent in some other way. It is impossible to get an adult diagnosis and assessment for more than one neurodivergency. You are going to have to find separate private providers. There is beginning to be some public provision and referral for ADHD diagnosis, which is great because ADHD is really not taken seriously enough, in my opinion, and in my experience with supporting neurodivergent adults. It leads to lower life expectancies, higher rates of addictions, also huge mental health problems, suicide if left unsupported, and a majority of ADHD adults are also unsupported, and the majority of autistic people are ADHD as well. So just really want to emphasise that. So it is great to see that there are some, but you're not talking, if you're trying to get support for what you need, you're not even just talking about paying for one assessment. You're talking, then you have to go and separately pay the same for another assessment for another neurodivergency. And a really important barrier as well is that because of the issues with child diagnosis and the AON, many autistic parents are prioritising paying for their children and are unable to access a diagnosis for themselves. So if they're able to save the money, they're putting it towards their children and trying to get their children the support they need, because it's, because they're parents, and also because it's so urgent that children are able to get the support they need as soon as possible. So those are other factors to keep in mind. And I'm just going to briefly kind of touch on Senator Black's question from earlier regarding disaggregated data. Yes, that we do believe that is absolutely crucial. Along the lines recommended by the CRPD committee, we know that there is inequality across the system. We know that there are gaps in knowledge and skill and provision, but we won't be able to fix those and address those and make the system more equal until we can measure what we're not seeing and measure where the work needs to be done. And that the collection of robust and disaggregated data is very much part of that.
Just in terms of services, there are some services that technically autistic people can apply to for help, like different employment services and stuff. Yet, despite our nearly 900 members and all the other autistic groups I would be involved in, I have never heard of somebody successfully failing of these. We're talking about this lack of diagnosis unless you can afford it. I am one of the rare people in Ireland that was diagnosed as an adult publicly. And to do so is very difficult, and it's very taxing, and you essentially have to be at a suicidal risk before it is considered. I was previously diagnosed with BPD, a diagnosis that I still stand by and I still believe I have. However, I am aware that many autistic people in Ireland, especially autistic women, are diagnosed with BPD incorrectly. Borderline personality disorder shares a lot of traits with autistic. The main difference being autistic traits are there from childhood, where BPD traits are developed later in life. I had to go toe-to-toe with people fighting that. As much as I value their BPD diagnosis, I think there's also an autistic diagnosis there. It took a year of fighting my own corner before I was able to be diagnosed. That is not a place you want to be in when you're already fighting against all the gremlins in your brain on a daily basis to merely survive. To add in the extra fight against a service that is supposed to be helping you is so counterintuitive. And I would never have been able to afford privately, because as Nem has already mentioned, like so many other people, I have to put my child first, and any money will always go towards the treatment of their healthcare over my healthcare. It's not right that we're putting autistic parents in this position that they have to decide whose is more important right now, because the assessments are not there publicly for the parents and the assessment waits are too long for the children.